Hello and welcome. In this video on HIPAA, we're going to be taking a look at updates and security patching across your environment. With HIPAA and the security rule and the privacy rule, there are a lot of requirements around kind of industry best practices. Some of this lives on a spectrum, so depending on the size of your organization and how critical you deem it to be per the security rule, that's going to determine how much investment you should be making to adhere to some of the detailed requirements of the security rule. So what exactly does this mean? Well, we're going to get into this and more and kind of talk about some of the specifics around ongoing maintenance, security, and patching for your HIPAA software. Let's dive in. Okay, so welcome to another edition of diving into HIPAA, into the weeds here on security. And this is probably one of the biggest things that keeps people up at night is the security side of HIPAA. Now, there's good reason for this. If you go take a look at the government HHS.gov website and you look at the wall of shame and look at some of the issues that are occurring, one of the things about the security and privacy rule is you have to report certain issues that are occurring. That's legally a requirement of being a HIPAA provider, is you have to report in to the government. And there's literally an ongoing list of security breaches that are constantly occurring. Now, one of the interesting things, if you look at this, is that about 95% of CIOs believe there's a heightened risk for security breaches. 2/3 of IT managers believe their environments have been breached in the last 12 months. This tends to be kind of sourcing from the open source software supply chain, as it's often called. You may or may not be aware of this, but typically whenever you are leveraging software, even if it's a secure software platform, it generally has hundreds, if not thousands upon thousands of dependencies on open source software. Now, that open source software may be hardware, infrastructure, operating systems. It may be software that's caching and performance tuning. It may be some form of alerting and notification, logging. It could be a critical aspect of the actual software itself. Really, the list goes on. All of these components are pretty consistently getting updates and patches, and sometimes those patches can contain vulnerabilities. The patch itself. Now, the interesting thing is most of the time, the issue is that the software itself just hasn't been updated. Someone finds a vulnerability, that gets posted, and then it goes viral. And so anyone that isn't constantly patching and updating is going to be at risk. That's the most common scenario. And whenever you have hundreds and thousands of different dependencies, or think of it as basically like different vendors and suppliers that are providing this different piece of the puzzle, and generally with software, you're not going to build a very robust, complex system unless you're leveraging other already existing software. That's really how it works. Then you basically have all of these dependencies baked in. So what is the solution, and how do you deal with this situation? Well, probably the biggest thing is to leverage a cadence of patching and make sure that you've got your just your overall business set up to be able to leverage auditing tools so that you can validate what risk is within the software itself. So think about this for a minute. Whenever you're dealing with HIPAA and the security rule, you're not just looking at just basic patching of your application itself. You're looking into the application and decomposing what it consists of to help you assess the risk. Now, this is something that you can delegate. You can work with a software vendor, of course, a hardware vendor, multiple different parties, CISO, etc. But the point is, this is an activity that we strongly recommend considering. Again, go back to this data that 95% of CIOs believe there's a heightened risk. And even though this says 2/3 of IT manager believe their environments have been breached in the last 12 months, I would strongly state that it's probably much higher than that. So think about what your risks are and what the number one issue is with HIPAA that we see all the time. If you haven't seen it, go to the HHS.gov website and take a look at some of the security breaches that are being reported constantly. Okay, so the number one thing that you can do is take this kind of set of best practices, which starts with security patching and having a cadence of updating your software constantly. Now, depending on your business, what we were talking about at the beginning of this video, there is a kind of clause with the security rule that literally says that you have to vary the level of investment you make so that essentially you don't go bankrupt doing this work. But where does that line get drawn for your business and within your space? And if you read into the fine print and you look at examples, essentially the government is trying to say that, and I'm no lawyer, so don't take this as legal advice, but ultimately they're trying to say that they don't want to put you out of business, but if it's a high risk thing, you need to be cognizant of how high risk your data is within your HIPAA environment. So if it's really sensitive data, and it's absolutely something that you have high exposure to because maybe you have a high number of users, or it's a public facing application, these kind of things, that's going to classify as pretty high risk generally. So then you generally can benefit by assigning a role is what we recommend within your organization. You may only have 3 people. You may have 1,000 people on your team. There at least needs to be a role, if not a department, that's focusing on this security aspect. Now, once you have at least a role, that role can be somebody who's serving multiple other roles too. They don't have to exclusively focus on this, depending on the size of your organization. As you grow, they certainly will, and as you grow, there will be a department that focuses on this. But then there has to be a cadence of reporting and auditing that gets rolled up to your executive staff and possibly even to a board level, and we recommend an external partner as well. So if you're kind of doing this work internally, this would be something that you would have a role for internally, but you can also hire an external role and someone who can fill that role externally. Regardless of who is mechanically doing it, the idea is that this is an important aspect. And if you just ask yourself, is it something that you might lose sleep over? And typically, whenever we talk with clients, the security side of things is absolutely one of the biggest Achilles heel as far as where they feel the biggest risk lies. And if you look at the data on the HHS website, you'll see that that is absolutely something that matches up to the data. So if you work with an internal role, an external role, you do want to set up a cadence as your business grows and as your potential risk grows that is kind of increasing in frequency. And just finally, one of the things that we'll leave you with is there's a lot of great software out there that can really make the job of this role a lot easier. Ultimately, you want to at least start with this kind of principle of inspecting what you expect and knowing that patching and updates, they really are a thing that is a requirement in order to have a secure stance and meet the baseline of the HIPAA security rule. If you're not doing this on some cadence, it could be once a year, once every 6 months, depending on your size, but generally weekly, monthly, or quarterly for most businesses, then you're really not taking this HIPAA security rule into account, and you're not really going to be able to stand up to the scrutiny of having actually attempted to meet HIPAA security. If you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to us in the comments. We also offer detailed dives on this, complimentary discovery and resources if you need any help with this topic. If you found this video helpful, please help us get the word out about this valuable content by smashing that like button. If you'd like to see more, feel free to subscribe, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.